You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Shelby.
Roger, today, talking about a blog article you recently put out that discusses research and development expenses and how they have changed with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. But before we talk about how they've changed, what were they originally under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
Well, we need to actually go back before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, because the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act made a significant change with respect to how we handle the tax treatment of research and development, the research and experimental expenditures that feed into the research and development tax credit. Before TCJA took effect on this provision starting in 2022, a business that was incurring research and experimental expenditures could currently deduct those, and that meant quite a big deal for purposes of the R&D tax credit. You didn't have to amortize those or capitalize those and amortize them over 5 years, which is what happened under TCJA. So effective for years beginning after 2021, you didn't get as big of an upfront deduction on your return or credit on your return as you did, before this TCJA provision took effect.
So what has changed now with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act?
Well, we've kind of gone back to where we were before TCJA changed the rules, again, starting in 2022. And so we get upfront deduction of research and experimental expenditures that feed into the R&D tax credit. So that's a big deal. We don't have to expense these expenditures anymore. We get a current deduction with a twist.
Can people apply things retroactively?
Yeah, that's the twist in this whole thing. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act allows certain businesses to make an election to apply the new rule retroactively to research and experimental expenses that are paid or incurred in tax years beginning after 21. So you can go back and get your expenses in 22, 23, and 24 if you qualify, and if you make an election. So you got to do those two things. What I mean by if you qualify is you have to be a small business that meets a specific test. And most of our Kansas operations are going to qualify for this because the test is defined as having average annual gross receipts of $31 million or less for the 3 tax years preceding the year in question. So that's your threshold that is used, and that's based on some other rules that are used for other portions of the code.
What are things that qualify for the research and development tax credit?
Well, if I'm going out and I'm experimenting, trying to reduce my fertilizer expense, I'm doing some experimentations with some new cover crops, maybe a no-till planting system, these planting techniques, or I'm custom designing equipment modifications, or I'm doing extensive testing with respect to soil and nutrient levels. That can all qualify. Now, there's really a lot of elements to this. It has to be a process of experimentation, and really you need to treat it like you're working in a lab as you're designing these things. But all my costs that go into that type of a process, such as if I have employees, the wages that I pay them, my input costs for getting seed fertilizer that I'm testing, whatever it might be, parts, for example, those are what are called research and experimental expenditures, and then you plug those into a formula and you're able to get an R&D tax credit. So actually, there can be a lot of things that farmers do that can potentially qualify for this, but you have to do it in a certain way to be able to have those expenditures qualify.
Roger, do you have an example of how things have changed from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to the One Big Beautiful Bill when it comes to this tax?
Well, in my blog article, I walk through a sample farm, and I set them up and say, well, let's say their average gross receipts are $25 million, so they're clearly under the $31 million, and they had taxable income for 22, 23, and 24 before you take into effect the research and experimental expenditures and credits of, let's say, $2 million in 2022, $2.1 million in 2023, and $2.2 million in 2024. Now, see, those are the ones they weren't able to claim under TCJA. They've had to capitalize those and recover those over a period of time. And let's say that they're qualified research expenditures. Those are known as QREs. They paid $100,000 in 22 for labor, supplies, testing, contractor fees, and then that was $120,000 the next year, and then last year it was $130,000. Well, when you do your credit calculation, what they're going to come up with is what I show, and I'll skip the math here. You get a $10,000 credit in 22, $12,000 credit in 23, and a $13,000 credit in 2024. Now that's a credit, so that comes dollar for dollar off of the tax liability. Now, before the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, what the law required, TCJA required, was these qualified research expenditures. Again, that's the $100,000, for example, in 22 for labor and supplies and testing and all that stuff. That had to be amortized over a 5-year period. So you didn't get the $100,000 deduction up front. You had to spread that out. So you go back and you file an amended return. So that's what you have to do in these situations. You have to file an amended return for 22, amended return for 23, and another amended return for 2024. And it's going to reduce tax liability, like I said, by the amount of the credit each year. And that's going to total up to $10,000 the first year, $12,000 the second year, and $13,000 the third year. So you're getting, in my example, the individual's recovering is reducing tax liability by virtue of those amended returns by $35,000. So it's worth it if you've got a lot of expenditures. And again, I've got a farm that is incurring over $100,000 of qualified research expenditures each year. Now, if you cut that in half, you're going to cut your credit way down too. So I'd say for the larger farming operations that do qualified research and incur qualified expenditures, it's probably worth it to have your returns amended to go back and grab this.
There are a lot of intricacies with this tax credit, but what is something that you'd really like to share with our farmers and ranchers, or really anyone that this could be impacting?
Well, this is one area that, unfortunately, the promoters of the R&D tax credit have really pushed hard, and they've gone over the line, and some have been investigated by IRS Criminal Investigation Division. And the technique, the R&D tax credit, the promoters have actually caused it to end up on the IRS Dirty Dozen tax scam list. So you got to be careful. It is a legitimate technique. This is nice, what Congress just did in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, to allow current deductibility of your expenses, and that's going to boost the credit and the ability to go back and retroactively file these amended returns and grab this. But you've got to be careful. I'm already aware that the promoters are contacting farmers. They're pushing this. CPAs have contacted me from all over the country saying, what should we be doing here? Well, there's a push on, because if you're going to file an amended return, you have to have all of those amended returns done by July 4 of next year. So, farmers are going to be pushed on this, but they need to go to their tax counsel, their CPA, their tax professional, whoever it is that they work with on this, and make sure that what they're doing actually qualifies. The expenses that they're incurring are qualified expenses.
And we obviously usually focus on people involved in agriculture here, Roger, but is this for anyone who owns a small business?
Yeah, it's for any qualified business. So $31 million average gross receipts over the previous 3 years. But this does have a lot of application to farmers and ranchers. So it's not just an agricultural related provision. It's for all types of businesses that do this qualified research. What
are some key characteristics that you've seen for people who have ill intentions and are a promoter?
As applied to agriculture, what I would say there is that some of the promotion seems to indicate that they can do random sampling. There are some recent tax court cases that indicate, no, promoters do not win those types of arguments. You've got to have a process, a scientific process for what you're doing. The other point I would say is to make sure that farmers understand that their entire farm is not their laboratory. You can have a sample plot, a research plot, a test area. You can have a lab inside your barn where you're testing things. But you're not going to get all of your expenses associated with your entire farm to count as qualified research expenses. Those seem to be the big ones. Remember, you got to meet a 4-part test. Your expenses, your activities have to be technological in nature. They have to resolve technical uncertainty. There has to be a process of experimentation. And you have to have a new or improved business component. And you got to document all of this. That's where promoters, I think, get a little bit get loose with this. They tend to gloss over those details. And those details are actually the core of the requirements to being able to claim the credit.
What is your key piece of advice then for farmers and ranchers avoiding these promoters or not getting caught up in their scam?
A couple of things here. I think a farm taxpayer should be really cautious of any promoter that doesn't ask for detailed information about the farmer's specific experimental activities and the technical uncertainties that they face, or what is their process of experimentation. That's what you have to have. And again, if a promoter is not asking for that information and is glossing over these requirements, then you're probably just dealing with claims for common farming practices that don't involve a true process of experimentation, and that's a big red flag.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure, Shelby.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. I will link his blog article, The OBBBA Research and Development Expenses, in today's show notes on actday.net.